remember back to Part 3, Section D, Territory and Region Bonuses, when I touched on one of the game's unified region bonuses. I had mentioned that each game has free starting units in RTS matches as one of the rewards for unifying said regions. Now we finally come to them. What makes them even more exciting is that I don't believe anyone else has recorded even just a few of these units, at least not on the official AOTR wiki, so I might be the first. As a bonus, I'll also cover some really cool miscellaneous features of AOTR's War of the Ring overhaul you might have missed. There's a lot to get through, so let's jump in. In vanilla, there's only one region you can capture to get a free starting in-unit in RTS battles, which is the in-unit for each faction. But in AOTR, there is one sub-region and several whole regions you can take in order to get these free special units, which allows many players the opportunity to get their special unit all at once to either fight one another with them or even team up with. The single sub-region which offers this bonus is Dorwinion, by far the easiest way to get this bonus, and the only single territory like it. Each faction gets one special unit each, which is different for each faction, for a total of 11 different free special units. It bears noting that no matter what sub-region or region you conquer, though, you get the same single unit per faction. So this should not be confused with AOTR's overhauled in-unit system, which has a different in-unit available per region for either good or evil factions as a whole instead of per faction. So the free special units are individualized per faction, but universalized across every sub-region and region which rewards the free special unit. So as long as you control that sub-region or unified region, you get that free special unit in any RTS match in any part of Middle-earth. You can see just how incredibly asymmetrical this is. The region of Haradwaith is by far the most difficult to unify and maintain, and you'll see how much of an asymmetrical gain this is when you see just what these special units can actually do. I hate to say it, but for many of these units you have to fight an awful lot for little gain. So you should temper your strategy a bit if you're really gunning for these units, depending on the faction at least. Given how many more territories are required for the south, honestly I wish Haradwaith would have had, say, 2 small regions to allow more players the opportunity to get their own special free unit, especially if you're playing in the open game version of Southern Conquest. It's just simply too big a region. I'd say that the Northeast could stand to have a whole region made for the special free unit, but having a single territory out that way for such a reward makes it a unique hotspot. Makes it that much harder to maintain as everyone goes gunning for that territory, and thus that much more fun. But depending on the faction, you could very easily get a rather powerful unit which could tip the scales. More on that in a bit. Unlike in vanilla, many of these free special units are not part of the main skirmish mode at all. This offers a greater degree of gaming value to AOTR's War of the Ring mode for sure. Other units are AOTR's in units, while others still are normal units from one faction added to another. Some are otherwise found only in the alternate or adventure factions like Shadow and Flame, but only 3 are found only in the War of the Ring mode, and all 3 of these units provide some hefty bonuses to whatever RTS match you play, being able to turn the tide of any battle. So these units offer great incentive in keeping each sub-region and unified region protected, and making them prime targets. But you only get 1 unit of these guys in any RTS match, and of course they do not carry over afterwards, so you gotta really work to keep them protected in order to benefit the most from what they have to offer. So let's show off these special free units. The Dunnish Seer for Isengard is a unique single unit which is only for support, and very expensive to unlock all of his abilities, 1700 total, so you gotta be mindful how you use him. More on this unit later.
Must protect the woods.
Fire shall spread.
Draw your swords!
Thungiles! Fire consumes all.
As you've seen, many of these units don't seem to offer a whole lot to supplement your armies. It's unfortunate given they cannot carry over from RTS matches to the overworld as they can in vanilla. However, there are a few which do radically change the outcome of RTS matches. Given that there's so many of these special free units and that most are already found in skirmish mode and don't really offer much in the War of the Ring, I'm going to take the time to explore only the 3 which can be found only in War of the Ring mode, and do offer quite a bit. Gondor's Sword of the Fountain, Isengard's Dunnish Seer, and Haradwaith's Arbiters of Zigur. Let's see what they actually offer each faction in battles. Because the Dunnish Seer is a support unit, naturally it doesn't do well in head-on battles. So let's look at an example of it supporting some Uruk-hai. We'll look at how they do on their own first against some Dwarven Guardians. Both sides are level 1 and have no upgrades, heroes, bonuses, etc. Not surprisingly, dwarves are a force to be reckoned with, so let's use the White Raven support power for the Dunnish Seer. So a pretty big difference, I'd say. The Seer's anti-crush armor buff keeps your weak wildman units alive that much better against any cavalry trying to trample them and move on, forcing a cavalry-centric enemy to engage in melee more, which makes them that much more vulnerable. So the Dunnish Seer keeps your wildman spam units alive much better against those pesky enemy cavalry, the bane of all spam units. In this case, it's the Tier 2 Rohirrim cavalry. Let's just take a moment to see clearly how vulnerable these guys really are. This went about as well as you'd expect. Now let's see how the Wildmen do with a little help from the Seer and Wolfgar. Naturally, the best defense against any cavalry, no matter how advanced, is always spearmen, and doing a cheap Wildman strategy is hard enough. But if you find yourself without spearmen, this is one of the only ways to do this against mid-game cav or higher. You gotta at least have the Wildmen fully upgraded with Wolfgar around to buff them with his leadership and have his massive armor buff, otherwise the tide can't begin to be turned without spearmen. Wolfgar with his leadership with even the substantial buff alone without the Seer just can't do it, so the Seer is the necessary supplement. Of course, Wolfgar's debuff goes a long way, as well as spellbook buffs and debuffs, but I'm just focusing on just unit buffs here to simplify the demonstration of how the Seer can turn the tide with very little else. So the anti-cav buff works best against early game cav, needless to say, otherwise you need to have several other buffs going to make the Seer have a real impact on your Wildman strategy to top it off. The Seer supplements a great early spam Wildman rush quite nicely. The White Raven can also do massive hero damage on its own, lasting for 60 seconds. If you target only a hero and he's got no archers, he'll be brought down by about 2/3 or more. However, incredibly enough, some melee heroes can defend themselves against this flying unit. And if you've got Wolfgar with you, you can have 3 Ravens. Great anti-hero combo. They even have a little bit of time to scout or do damage to other heroes or monsters. Amazingly, the Seer can even debuff heroes and heroic units, one of the only units in the game to do so. While 15% doesn't sound like much, it certainly tips the scales in your favor. Especially when you take into consideration you can also buff and heal your own heroes. This is the cherry on top. This is the only way for Isengard to buff a hero, by the way, giving you that extra edge. So as you've seen, this guy is worthy of being added to your roster of units in any War of the Ring campaign. As you can see, the Dunnish Seer can turn the tide in all kinds of scenarios. There are a few more things to explore though. His ability to do heavy damage to structures while also disabling them is pretty nice, given the limited number of structures in War of the Ring and that they can't level up past level 1, keeping their health low. And being able to debuff structure armor a little makes them go down that much faster. And if you gotta lay siege to a fortress, he's even better. He can open up gates to offer a nasty surprise to any enemy when you don't have enough siege weapons. Normally you'd have to take considerable time and resources in AOTR's War of the Ring to get siege from the overworld map to rush the gate successfully before the enemy has time to retaliate, and even more time to protect the siege and to actually break down the gate. So you save a ton of hassle having this unit nicely hidden in your army when attacking a fortress. Takes a few seconds for the gate to actually open, but well worth the nasty surprise awaiting the enemy. As you can see, you want to be able to protect the region you're getting this unit from for the free unit bonus. Coming to Haradwite's Arbiters of Zigur, we have a very different kind of support unit. This one you need to have at a higher level to appreciate all it can offer. The Arbiters can fight, but aren't really that great except weaker, lower tier units, even at level 5 with just melee, no abilities. However, they can be buffed by CR rule, though not by the cultists of Zigur, which is probably a bug. However, they can buff themselves as well as their surrounding allies, which can make them quite deadly when combined with CR Rules buff, to say nothing of spellbook buffs. So let's see how they do with no buffs against some of the deadliest non-heroic units in the game, the Iron Hills Warriors, which can debuff enemy armor per hit. Here you can see they can barely cut through even one battalion of Iron Hills Warriors. But with their self-buff followed by CR Rules buff, due to these buffs being on short time limits, it's actually better to use one until it deactivates than followed immediately by the other to maximize on their efficiency. As you can see, they can really dish it out now. But what about their fireball power? It can deal massive amounts of splash damage in a fairly wide radius with a very long range. It works best against lower tier units that aren't dwarves, but the small amount of damage it dishes out to even higher tier ones like the Iron Hills Warriors certainly adds up in a fight. So let's check out all of this together then. So seeing everything they can do now, let's see what they can do supporting a small force. We'll first use the Black Numenorians against the Iron Hills Warriors. No upgrades, buffs, etc. for either side, and both sides level 1. So even the great Black Numenorians can't hold the line against these guys. But what about with one battalion of the Arbiters? The Arbiters completely flip the script, so you can see on their own how invaluable these guys can be for any War of the Ring campaign, even apart from the other heroes and buffs. Gondor's Sword of the Fountain special free unit is the ultimate tank unit. Very straightforward, simple to use, they can dole it out on their own and even more with support. You can see here that unlike the Dunnish Seer and Arbiters of Zigur units, these guys can drop 5 battalions of Dwarven Guardians while hardly breaking a sweat, no buffs, leaderships, etc. Against the Iron Hills Warriors, on the other hand, a little different. We'll see how they do as support against these guys in a moment, though. So before we see the Sword of the Fountain unit as a support, let's see what the soldiers of Minas Tirith can do against the Iron Hills warriors. This is important because it's only these units which can buff the Sword of the Fountain. Now that we've seen what these guys are all about, remember that the Sword of the Fountain unit gets considerable stackable buffs from the Minas Tirith troops and slightly heals nearby troops for every Sword of the Fountain unit killed. Now let's see the results. Notice I keep the special unit in the very front to tank as much damage as possible and distract the Iron Hills troops enough at the same time. This also keeps the debuffs of theirs from hitting my troops with the much weaker armor. Much better. The Sword of the Fountain unit is a powerful addition to any Gondor army in War of the Ring. By the way, it's worth noting that these guys get the same buff as the Fountain Guards, and of course they heal up one another for every unit of theirs that dies, so it's pretty amazing to pair these up together with your Minas Tirith troops, needless to say. But the cherry on top for these guys? Their considerable structure armor buff. This makes up for the loss of the Stoneworker structure in the War of the Ring mode. But the great thing is, it does stack with the other structure armor buffs from Baragond and the Fountain Guards. This is critical when defending your fortresses, especially in the capital assault scenario where your capital is a fortress. Hold that gate. Doesn't get any better than with Gondor. You can see how easy it is to take a gate down, no buffs. But watch the armor buffs from these three stack. When small moments matter, these guys will keep your fortress standing that much longer. And needless to say, these three buffs do wonders at making your normal limited bases in AOTR's War of the Ring the staunchest bases of all the factions. So get these special units and hold the line. We'll conclude this video with Aragorn. There is something about him you cannot do in the vanilla game's War of the Ring that's actually really cool. While not a new unit strictly speaking, in AOTR, Rivendell's hero Aragorn has a hidden special feature which massively boosts his combat prowess, which makes him feel like a new unit. To help make up for the loss of Elisar, you can still use Aragorn, but only for the Rivendell faction. To reflect how this change is more in line with the historical vibe of the books, you can now have Aragorn upgraded. That's right, if you put him on any fortress plot for a couple turns, he will be upgraded with Andúril. However, it's kind of tricky knowing if he has it or not, as there are no descriptions anywhere saying you can get it or how for the War of the Ring mode specifically. It's a very cleverly hidden feature, but you can tell by looking at the model itself, if you know how the sword looks of course. But you'll also notice that he's not carrying the broken sword at his side. This is a great detail from the books. But the most clear way of knowing he has the sword upgrade is when he attacks. Listen to that beautiful sword clanging sound effect. And here you can see how Aragorn looks without the upgrade. There's the broken sword. And of course he has his normal sound effects when he attacks.
We must stand against them! We've encountered some orcs.
Well, this about wraps up this video. Stay tuned for more Appendix style videos down the road to finish off little but fun details in this series on the War of the Ring mode.